It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. In the Great March of Return in Gaza, tens of thousands of Palestinians have marched to commemorate the Nakba, the mass deportation of Palestinians in 1948, which turned them into a nation of refugees until this day. The Israeli response to the non-violent protests has been to kill over 110 unarmed protesters and to injure thousands, which led to the collapse of the Gaza medical facility. After burying the 58 people who were gunned down on Monday, weighing that against the celebrations in Jerusalem over the opening of the U.S. Embassy, many ask themselves whether the lives lost are worth it. Are they effective, as Israel appears to be going about its business? The other question this raises is, are peaceful, nonviolent protests the best way for Palestinians to earn their freedom? A new article published by 972 magazine with the title, "You are far more likely to be killed protesting in Gaza than firing a rocket," reveals a worrying fact that the Israeli armed forces are more likely to take the lives of non-violent protesters than those of Palestinians using weapons in their struggle for freedom. Why? Join us for a discussion with the author of the article, Michael Omer-Mann. He is a writer and journalist and commentator and critic based in Israel. He is the managing editor at 972 magazine. Michael, good to have you with us.
Glad to be with you.
Now, Michael, your article implies that Israeli forces actually prefer the Palestinians to use violence over peaceful, nonviolent protests. Why?
I'm not sure the Israeli army has a preference. I think they would prefer that the Palestinians not resist the occupation at all. What I saw and what I found was that since February 18th, which is about a month and a half before the Great Return March protests began, that not a single rocket has been fired from Gaza into Israel. And this is the framing of the conflict that we get most of the time between Gaza and Israel, is that rockets are fired from Gaza into Israel, and Israel responds with F-16s and tanks and mass destruction. And so I looked at the numbers of in the time before these protests, when rockets were being fired, and in the 18 months before these protests started, dozens of rockets and mortar shells were fired into Israel from Gaza. And in those 18 months, 28 people were killed inside of Gaza. And in one day of these protests, we saw a death toll that by now has reached 62 people. That's more than actually the entire period between the end of the 2014 war and the beginning of these protests, and surpassed in one day. I think the easiest answer about why that is that they're hundreds of meters away. They're showing themselves. They're within gunshot range, but it's astounding, and it's depressing. It's sad and depressing.
Right. Give us a sense of how you made the tallies you have. How did you calculate the data and come to these conclusions?
Firstly, I asked the Israeli army spokesperson when the last rocket was fired, just to make sure that it had gone unreported, and as I suspected, there had been no rockets fired. And the Shin Bet, Israel's internal security agency, publishes data once a month about every sort of security incident or terrorist incident, as they call it. And so I just went month by month and did a tally of how many rockets and mortars were fired from Gaza into Israel, and lined that up with detailed casualty information, which is compiled by the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, who sends its field workers to investigate every death on the Palestinian side of this conflict.
All right, I'm going to cut here to a clip that we have of Major General Etienne Dango, former commander of the Israeli forces in the occupied Palestinian territory and currently a senior government official, and they're talking about their strategy for Gaza.
We are in a different event from a declaration about some kind of popular uprising. The new event means that we are witnessing an attempt to enter and infiltrate Israel under the cover of so-called human munitions. And the second thing, remember that the Hamas date is May 15th. We shouldn't wait until then. We must initiate. I don't rule out, in a situation of a perimeter, an Israeli entry into Gaza. I don't rule out death bombing and striking. Hamas is the enemy.
All right, Michael, let's start with you trying to explain the context in which Major General Etienne Dango is speaking here.
The Israeli army put out a lot of information. There were a lot of statements by politicians, the political and military echelons of the decision-making structures in Israel. Basically saying that, that we're expecting mass groups of people just to storm over the border, and that the Israeli population in southern Israel is at risk. And it just, they announced that they were going to be stationing 100 snipers on the Gaza border ahead of the first day of protests in which at least 16 people were killed. And we heard quotes all the way up to the defense minister, like the one that you just heard right now, basically warning or declaring that there will be Palestinian casualties.
All right. Now, on the other side of the border, last week, a group of extreme right-wing Israeli activists have attempted to launch their own attack against Gaza by flying a burning kite into Gaza in order to cause a fire. Now, their plan actually backfired, literally, because the kite ended up starting a fire on the Israeli side instead, from what we saw. Now, did the Israeli military, how did they respond to this? I mean, obviously, they didn't assassinate these folks, which are making some efforts of their own to do what the Israeli military is doing.
Yeah, so this is a kind of a cynical response by from what I understand, a well-known right-wing activist in response to a tactic that the Palestinian protesters have adopted over the past several weeks, which is to send kites with various burning materials over the border to try and set agricultural fields on fire. And this guy tried to give them a taste of their own medicine, probably in his mind, and as you said, it backfired.
All right. Now, what is the reaction inside Israel, Michael, to the Great March of Return? Do you think that the choice of Palestinians to stick to nonviolent protests is making an impression on the Israelis at all? Because I know in terms of the international community, there was a great relief when we understood that the Palestinians were actually planning a non-violent and a peaceful demonstration over the period, so the last month. But was it received in the same way in Israel?
Unfortunately, we'll never find out, because these protests were never portrayed as nonviolent protests in Israel. They were portrayed as Hamas-driven terror marches, in which people were paid to basically march to their deaths and try and cross the border and terrorize the Israeli communities on the other side. We really have seen very, very, very little reporting in the Hebrew media, in the Israeli media, that refers to this as nonviolent or even unarmed protests or civilian protests. It's been hammered again and again and again that this is Hamas initiative, which we know just isn't true. I mean, it was organized by civilians in Gaza from various political affiliations. And yes, Hamas, as the biggest political mobilizer, in addition to its armed activities, sent people there. They hired buses and they sent people there. But to describe it as a Hamas, terror or the way it was in the Israeli media and put out by the Israeli army and government, it basically precluded us from ever having that discussion.
I've been speaking with Michael Omer-Mann. He is a writer, journalist, commentator, and critic based in Israel. He's the managing editor at Plus 972 magazine. I thank you so much for joining us today, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.